Hello everyone, Vulcan here, and today I'm bringing you my review of episode 3 of RWBY Volume 4. Now in this episode we finally get to see Blake and the best girl Yang, which I was really happy about because I was really curious to know what was happening with them, particularly with Blake. Yang, I can't say I was too expectant to see anything special because we already know from the opening that she's in patch, and as many people suspect that she's dealing with some PTSD issues. Now, I'm not going to delve too much into that because I'm not an expert on mental illnesses by any means. So chances are I'm probably going to say stuff that doesn't fit well with a lot of people. So I apologize in advance if some of the things I say will anger you. That's absolutely not my intention. So moving forward, I'm going to talk about Yang first simply because she got a lot less screen time than Blake. So I feel that there's a bit less to say about her and the fact that she's best girl. So when we first see her, she turns her head towards books that are lying beside her, and immediately you could see that she misses Blake a lot. And the books basically represent Blake because, as we all know, Blake is pretty much associated with books as far as the series is concerned. Not to mention the fact that she is based on the Beauty from the Beauty and the Beast, who was quite the bookworm. So right after that, we get to she turns on the TV, and on it there's basically nothing but bad news. And one of the guys that appeared on the TV looks a lot like Danny Wallace. If some of you don't know who he is, Danny Wallace is the guy, I assume a lot of you would have played Assassin's Creed. Danny Wallace is the guy who voices Sean Hastings in Assassin's Creed. And the guy in the TV really looks a lot like him, so it would have been funny if the guy sounded like him as well. But I guess it's kind of hard to come by people who have the sort of accent that Danny Wallace would have, as well as his snark as well, basically. And right after that, we get to see Lisa Lavender, who, by the way, has movement for the first time in this series. So that was really good to see, and it just goes to show how much the animators of the show have improved, and how much Maya has helped them as well. Lisa is talking about Adam, and curiously enough, Yang did not show too much of a reaction, which is a bit of an important point that I'll get to later on. Right after that, Tai Yang comes back into the house, and he's really excited, and the reason for that is because Ironwood has sent them a robot arm. When that appeared, I was so happy, I was so excited. Though Yang refused to actually try it on right away. I guess that makes sense because to me, Yang is a very stubborn person, and that's kind of that's really what I like about her. One of the many things I like about her. And I suppose from her perspective, accepting the robot arm would be like accepting help from outside sources, and I think that Yang wants to restore herself on her own. Which brings me to to the next point, basically. I'm a bit disappointed that the robot arm came so soon in the volume. I would have expected that at least we wouldn't get to see any robot arm until the next volume even. What I was hoping to see was Yang decided to go out on a journey of her own in order to find herself again, become the person she used to be, and even become a better person, a better fighter even. And to me, the fact that the robot arm comes so soon is a bit of a cop-out, but at the same time potentially not, because the robot arm is there for the taking, basically. So I suppose it can be a bit of a temptation for her to just get it and decide to use it and choose the easy path toward becoming the person that she used to be. And I guess that really makes sense. Now, I know a lot of people associate the fact that, I know that there's rather some people who associate the fact that she refused the robot arm with her PTSD. So like I said, once more, I don't know too much about PTSD, and if I'm completely wrong, I do apologize, and do correct me below in the comment section if you feel the need to. I'm perfectly open to discussions. So moving on to the next scene, we see Yang doing some housework, and she reaches a point where she's cleaning the glass, and the glass breaks, and at that point she remembers her encounter with Adam and how she lost her arm. Now, to me that's really curious because earlier in the episode, she did not show too much of a reaction other than curiosity, and she didn't show much fear, essentially. But when the glass breaks, that's when she really starts getting scared. And to me, that symbolizes not her fear of Adam, but rather the fear that she won't be able to fix herself anymore. That she'll remain the broken self, the broken version of herself, and with no hope of becoming stronger anymore. And that's what really frustrates her. That's what causes her to just pound the surface of the kitchen. And Taeyang sees that and he's really distressed about that. And really, I have every sympathy for Taeyang. He's trying his best to be the best father, and he is really a good father. Trust me, he's amazing. The things that he does for Yang, and the way he's really trying. He's really trying. I like him so much, and I really hope that he succeeds. And about Taeyang, I also really hope to see him fighting at some point, because the dude is ripped as fuck. And I want to think that he wasn't the weak link of Team Stark. So that's as far as Yang is concerned. All my prayers go out to her. And moving on to Blake, the episode starts off with her on a boat, and I was quite surprised to see that she is not already with her family, especially considering that between volumes 3 and 4 quite a lot of time should have passed, which is a plot hole I'll also get into later on. But basically, she's on a boat and she's not with her family, but I still suspect that her family is a family of pirates, because remember back to the opening, her father is a fucking titan. I mean, look, just remember that guy. He's easily twice as huge as Taeyang, and Taeyang is a pretty big dude. So I can't wait to see Blake's family. But we did get to see another really cool character, Captain Findus. This dude, oh my god, I like him so much. He has a lot of wisdom in him. I can really tell, because he's really trying to help Blake out, despite the fact that he doesn't know anything about her. After the conversation, he goes to leave her on her own, giving her the advice, as well as, I suppose, foreshadowing events later on in the episode, that a friendly face really would help her, considering how paranoid she is, which she really is, I suppose, because she's afraid that the White Fang is following her. And after the conversation, we do even see a hooded figure, which I thought was one of the Assassin's Creed bros from the opening, but apparently not, as I'll get to later on. Just before the scene transitions over to Yang, we get to see what looks like the fins of a sea dragon. And once we get past the Yang scenes, the right after Blake asks the hooded figure who he is, or who she is, wink wink, the sea dragon appears, and that thing is huge. So we get to see Bae. Her name is Mate, or Mate. I don't know how that name is supposed to be pronounced, but I'm gonna call her Mate simply because it's easier for me to say it, and I'm a lot more used to hearing that word for reasons. And she notes that they've never fought anything that big, and Captain Findus mentions we've never seen anything this big. Now the curious thing is, before he says that, he says by the gods. Now, that's a really curious thing, because that's the first reference to gods in the entire series. So I'm curious to see what sort of religions exist in the World of Remnant. So one thing I'm hoping to see is that one of the World of Remnant episodes that eventually are going to be happening later on will talk more about cultures and religions, because World of Remnant episodes have already covered things on the history of each of the 4 kingdoms. But it'll be nice to get more in-depth knowledge of what their cultures are and what religions exists throughout the World of Remnant, and basically to know what religion Captain Findus believes in. So yeah, that was a really curious statement. So fight begins. The fight itself was so much better than the Golem fight in episode 1. There's a lot of things happening, and seriously, Jean could take lessons on strategy from Captain Findus, and Findus is not even a huntsman. So, first things first. One thing I noticed in particular was Blake's usage of her semblance. Now, in previous volumes, Blake's clones did not really have the ability to affect their surroundings, because they didn't really have material form without the use of dust. But in this episode, we actually see Blake's clone fling Blake herself through the air when she's charging at the sea dragon. So that was curious to see, because the usage of Blake's clone there was a lot more similar to the way Sun uses his semblance. So the boat attacks the dragon to no real avail, and Captain Findus decides to call out the heavy cannon, and the sea dragon unleashes its wings, essentially becoming Gyarados. Some of you who may or may not have seen my theory video on Silver Eyes, in that video I mentioned that grip powers and maiden powers are quite similar in a sense. And one thing I mentioned in that video was something happens in this episode which hints at the possibility that maiden and grim powers are quite similar. The reason I said that is because this Sea Dragon Grim can unleash what looks like a Hyper Beam, but it has electrifying effects. We can see that quite clearly when a particular character later on... Oh yeah, by the way, I wanted to mention this. Sun Wukong is in this episode. Yes! I was really happy because he's easily one of my favorite characters. I just like the aero positivity that Sun brings to the show, and he was easily the best thing that happened in this episode, which by the way is also quite ironic considering it's Michael who voices him, and he is the angriest person, particularly in his rage quit videos. So in any case, when the Sea Dragon unleashes its Hyper Beam, we see Sun get electrified. That is the first instance of anything using elemental effects on a character without the use of dust. And who else uses elemental powers without dust? The 4 maidens. So that further reinforces my theory from the previous video, wherein I said that Grim and maidens have very similar powers, and why Silver Eyes has a particular effect on maidens and Grim. Because one would think that, hold on, maidens are human, so why would they be affected in the same way as Grim as a result of Silver Eyes? So there's a lot going on here. So that was really cool to see because it goes some way to confirm my theory regarding Grim and maidens. So, and similarly to Blake, I really like Sun's use of his semblance because when we first saw it, it didn't really do much, but in this episode, it does a lot more. It really helps Sun. They really do a lot in the fighting. We get to see a lot of stuntsmanship with them. And you can just see that as Blake and Sun are fighting, they just work so well together. And I suppose a lot of that does have to do with the fact, not just that they're faunus, but also because their semblances are quite similar. So it's easy for both of them to adapt to each other's style in a sense. Sun is just funny as hell. My hero. Like, that was funny to see when Blake was holding Sun in her arms. And then later on, he's like, now it's your turn to say it. It was a really fun battle, and Captain Findus' strategy was on point. It really was, because what he mentions is that if they can clip the dragon's wings and draw it out towards the bow of the ship, they can take it down. And to me, as a strategy, that made a lot more sense than hit it harder. Like, what? And also, as my boy Adele mentioned as well in this video, he had to watch the Golem fight, in particular the part where Ruby and Nora take out its limbs several times in order to be able to tell whether or not all of its limbs were taken out at once. And to be in actuality, it's not shown whether or not all the limbs are taken out at the same time. In fact, it even appears like that didn't happen. But this episode really goes a long way to show just how well a strategy works if it's employed correctly and if it makes sense. And Captain Findus, he's a really, really good strategist. You can tell that he's probably dealt with Grim across the sea in the past. And so this wasn't anything really new to him. You can tell he's very experienced. Really, really good fight. I really enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun to watch, and I can watch it so many times. So right after the fight, Blake is very upset. Now, here's the plot hole that I mentioned earlier, because a lot of their conversation kind of suggests that Sun was following Blake for a very short period of time, like maybe 3 or 4 days. Because if he'd been stalking her for 6 months, as some people mentioned Sun being creepy, he said a few things that implied that he's only been following her for a short time. Namely, he really likes the outfit, as if it's the first time that he's seen it. And second of all, Blake mentions that Sun is completely wrong about what she's trying to do, because Sun thinks that Blake is trying to take on the White Fang on her own as a form of vengeance. He's basically trying to pull a Kill Bill. And that's not the case. Now, if Sun had been following her for an extensive period of time, 6 to 8 months, which is the time skip, I would have thought that Sun would have figured out by that point that Blake is not headed toward the White Fang, but away from it. Yet he still thinks that that's what she's trying to do. She's trying to take on the White Fang. It was really good to see their interaction, basically. And Sun is just an air of positivity, really ironic, again, considering Michael is the one that voices him. And also enjoyed the reference to Journey to the West, when he says it'll be like a real journey to the East. And right after that, we move on to Cinder and Salem. This scene, guys, I cannot make heads or tails of it. When Salem says, "Don't try to fight it," it's like, what is going on? What kind of treatment is she giving Cinder? And then all of a sudden, this octopus-like thing appears. And what the fuck is that? Seriously, guys, what the fuck is that? And Emerald and Mercury look scared as fuck as usual, which is a complete change from their behavior in the previous volumes. I really don't understand. Why would they be scared of Grimm to such an extent, considering that they are strong enough to be able to fight much larger Grimm than that octopus? I suppose they would not be strong enough to fight Salem, but regular Grimm like that, really doesn't make sense. Now, Salem, I think she's pretty sure that she knows that Ozpin is still alive, and she doesn't particularly blame Cinder for it, because if my theory is true, like I said in previous videos, that Ozpin has done some time warping shit and he's stuck in something like the crack of time and he's unable to get out. He's still alive, just not in the world. So it makes sense that Cinder would think that he's dead, but he's actually not, and Salem knows it because she's quite familiar with Ozpin and supposedly way more familiar with what he can do than anyone, including us, the audience. And then she mentions that there's a relic in Remnant. Now, we have no idea what the relic is, what it does, what it's supposed to represent. So I'm not going to say anything about that. I'm not going to make any theories. So hopefully we'll get to know something about what's going on soonish. So that was the end of the episode, and that's the end of my review. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Comment down below, like the video if you did, and subscribe to my channel for more, and I will see you next time.